All right, I brought you guys on because we're gonna debate the Hart Trophy. It's that's why I'm really dressed up in a suit and shirt today, and not because I'm coming from some 3-3 in the AHL beat or anything like that. That's not why on us this we're recording this on a Sunday night, but we're talking about the Hart Trophy today, and that's why I have both of you on because we're gonna try to do this around the horn debate. And Harrison, who based on his background and based on coverage of the Lightning, is going to represent Nikita Kucherov, and Matthew, who's out west as our West Coast correspondent, he'll represent Macklin Celebrini, and I'll try to do my best job of representing Nathan MacKinnon here. So we'll start. I'll start with you, Harrison, with Kucherov, because I think Kucherov's the favorite here as we enter the home stretch. It seems like it's his award to lose at this point in the season. So I want you to make your opening case for why you think he should win it this time around.
Besides the fact that I would make that case almost every single season when it talks about the defending Ted Lindsay Trophy winner. Now, with last year, Connor Hellebuck played out of his mind. There was no reason to not give it to him. But for this year, when it comes to someone playing out of their absolute minds, you got to think about how Nikita Kucherov has played since his slow start to begin the year. I have made sure to check the stats before I came on the show today, and since at least the new year, well, actually, no, all the way to November, he's been averaging more than 2 points per game. When you, over the course of the season for a 82 game pace, since around that time, he's at about a pace for 180 points and well over 50 goals. Sure, he's not going to probably get to some of those marks this season because of, again, it's a pace. It's not the full season. But that just gives you an idea of the how much he's been contributing this year for the Lightning. And that's to say something too, because think about with the way they've improved the depth this year, and he still proves to be just that absolute key piece in the machine. And originally I was going to point out another talking point, but I still think it's relevant to mention. He's missed the last couple of games because of illness, but up until then, he had a genuine shot at getting 100 assists for the second time in his career. Why not many other players have 100 assists in their careers multiple times? It's one. It's Wayne Gretzky. So if someone had a case, if not for illness, to do a Gretzky-esque feat, that says enough for me. He deserves the heart.
It's crazy. You're talking about every year you want to make the case, and that's actually an interesting point. Is that it seems like a lot of voters this year are looking back at his career and saying, "Wow, he's only won one Hart Trophy." And you look back and you're like, "You should have won more, considering how good he is." And every year it's gets all the points, he gets all these points, and he does, and there's always some other person that's like, "Oh, he had a good year." Or maybe Connor Hellebuck had a great year, so he did that. Connor Hellebuck deserves it, or it's always someone else that has this incredible year that all of a sudden puts them ahead, and Kucherov finishes second and third. And this season, it's hard to deny, especially stats wise, where he has the stats to back it up. Matthew, I'll turn it over to you. And it's interesting because Celebrini's this is his first time in the conversation. So it's first time there. I wonder what you think would put him over the top, and what makes him the Hart Trophy favorite, or his case for the award.
Well, my definition is always with this. Whenever the Hart Trophy, they call it the most valuable player in the NHL. Okay. So if you take up Kucherov off of the Lightning, do the Lightning still make the playoffs? Yes, I believe they would, even though Kucherov just dominates. They still have some really great players that could probably push them there. You take Connor McDavid off the Oilers, they'd probably still make it. Draisaitl is still there. You take Nathan MacKinnon off the Colorado Avalanche, they're not as dominant, but they still have Natchez. They still got Landeskog. They still got Brock Nelson. They got some really good players as well. You take Celebrini off the Sharks. I'm sorry, they're not where they are. They're definitely not by the playoffs. He has 98 points right now. The next point getter that's behind him is Will Smith with 49. That's nearly half his point total. And then you're looking at even for goals. Will Smith is second with 21. He's got 36. It's just such a dichotomy of what he's just so far ahead of the other guys that are on his team. He carries the offense. He's their best player. He's the most valuable player to his team. And that's my definition of the Hart Trophy is the most valuable. And he's the most valuable to me of all the other guys that are in the conversation. But it's never that way. When you're looking at the league, that's not what they always look at. Is look at who has the most points. That's probably who wins it. I mean, Celebrini, I think, has the biggest case just because he's the most valuable player on the Sharks. He's the most valuable player to his team. Without him, the Sharks are nowhere near where they are. He's been just so good. And then you move him in, he was in the Olympics and he was one of Team Canada's best players. I mean the debate with Kucherov is that he didn't go to the Olympics. I mean he would have been there if Russia was part of it, but he also got all that rest that none of the other players in this conversation did. They were all playing in the Olympics. So, I mean, Celebrini has just been phenomenal at this season. And he's probably going to hit 100 points. I would bet that he's just going to go pointless for the rest of the season. He'll hit 100 points. And he is the most valuable player in the NHL to me because of what he's done this season for the Sharks.
I think according to the definition, when you say most valuable to their team, and that's interesting because if you take Celebrini off the Sharks, where are the Sharks? What are they the worst team in the NHL? Are they the second worst team in the NHL? How bad are the Sharks? How are we talking about the Sharks rebuild? We're talking about the rebuild in a way that, oh wow, this is such a great rebuild. It's such a success. It's ahead of schedule. They're almost a playoff team, and take them away and where are they? And where are they? He's that impactful. And then you talk about how much of the points he has. And I knew coming in with MacKinnon, he's not going to win that narrative where okay, he's the most valuable to his team. Celebrini kind of has that going for him, and he's not doesn't have the stats or have that every game he has the same points that Kucherov has with the Lightning. So for me, I'm trying to figure out how to toe this line, which is, yeah, he kind of accomplishes both. But I think from a narrative perspective, this is the thing I would say for MacKinnon is I always like to ask this about every season when it comes to every award, which is what will you remember from this season? What is that big story that you think about when you look at the story of the 2025-2026 season? What will you remember? And I think one of the things you'll remember is how dominant the Avalanche were, especially how dominant the start the Avalanche had, which was they just blew everyone out of the water, and they still are the best team in the NHL. They still are, and they're on pace to win the President's Trophy. Last I checked, I know that the Stars have closed in on them, but they're the best team, and they're also in the best division. So they have those teams that they have to battle every week or really every night. MacKinnon's the best player on that team, so you have that going for them. And then the other part I think is interesting with MacKinnon is the old narrative was, oh, well, he's going to do great. He's got Makar and MacKinnon, and Makar and Mikko Rantanen and Gabriel Landeskog. Well, Mikko Rantanen's not there anymore. Gabriel Landeskog's been in and out of the lineup. He's been hurt lately. So MacKinnon really is the driver of that offense, the driver of that team. And I know he has Makar on the back end, so that could be held against him there because Makar is that good. But you're looking at someone who just does so much, and you talk about from that center spot where he does all the stuff for the Avalanche. That's where I would say he deserves it again. He won 2 years ago. I think he's got a good case again. I think that's why I would say he's the person you might want to vote for. Why voters will look at and say he actually is the most valuable player in the NHL. I'll actually, I know Matthew mentioned some of the things, but I'll actually start by pushing back on Harris, and I want you to answer on the pushback questions, which are Matthew mentioned that he didn't go to the Olympics, which is one of the things that's like, okay, it's not his fault, or it's not that was out of his control that he didn't go to the Olympics. But I think when you look at voters, they'll say, okay, well, he had those 2 weeks of rest, and he's coming back now where everyone else is playing at whether it's 80% or even 60%, just because a lot of players are coming back hurt from the Olympics or battling something. He's well rested and playing at full strength. That's one pushback where, okay, is it fair to judge him there? And then the other one, which is the classic one you probably have are well rehearsed in, which is he's a winger, he's not a center. How valuable is he? How valuable is he defensively? Because defensively, as a winger, can you be as good? Even though I think his defensive metrics might actually be pretty good. But those are the two pushbacks I'd say for Kucherov, which are doesn't play center, which okay, like that's the one we've used a lot, and he didn't go to the Olympics. Your response to that?
Okay, so I definitely was prepared specifically for the rest of the 2 weeks rest. I've seen that come up a couple of times, especially when you hear an NHL writer is not going to vote for him on that reason alone. So my counter to that is how easily it could have been the opposite scenario in which he's off for 2 weeks and it makes you rusty. And then I'm starting to flip the script here and saying, oh, well, if he had just had that time in the Olympics when he could have stayed going and fine-tuned, then maybe he'd still be in this thing. And I'm going to use his fellow lightning rushing counterpart as an example with Andrei Vasilevsky, who's sure still, one of the leading candidates for the Vezina, but he hasn't quite looked himself since the Olympic break came to an end. And you can make the argument, maybe is he rusty? Did something go wrong while he was away? Maybe if Russia had been in the Olympics and he's between the pipes with the other Vezina candidate, Soroka, both going in tandem, he also has not quite looked himself as much either. So there's a few examples you can look to where it could have totally been the opposite scenario with Kucherov, and he's been able to just pick up right where he left off. As when it comes to the wingers and the defensive thing, I happened to catch this one defensive metric before coming on here. I don't know the case for MacKinnon, but I saw it compared to Celebrini. Kucherov has a better defensive point share. He has three Celebrini's at around 2.7, 2 point. I know it's a slim difference, but like when comparing the two, you can either say they're essentially equal when it comes to that, or Kucherov is slightly ahead. So I think when it comes to that argument, there's at least some equal footing there.
I think that's interesting is you talk about the center versus the wing part, which is the same thing we have the Selke trope, which is you can't vote for a winger for that because they don't take face-offs and that okay, well, or they don't have that same impact when it comes to watching the games. You mentioned I actually want to push back one thing, or actually follow up on one thing. You mentioned the goaltenders, and you mentioned two goaltenders, but do you feel like goaltending is a little bit different? I guess it's similar to pitching in baseball, where you that's more routine. Where if you don't start or you don't play for a few weeks, that throws you off. Where a forward, where you play all the time and then you get that rest, do you feel that does help more?
Well, it's definitely a very good point. I did mention a completely different position, and I will give you that respect right there. And sure, I'm sure it makes a difference, but I still think in the grand scheme of things, the point stays the same, in which, yes, as a forward, you could essentially get more rest, but keep this in mind. You know, forwards cycle in and out of games. They're playing about Kucherov plays about what 21 minutes a game, whereas goalies are in there for all 60 minutes. It's just a different type of workload. So I think that could potentially even out the argument there.
Yeah, I mean that's the interesting point there, which is, I mean, yeah, Kucherov taking is one of those players that like once he gets going, all then you could tell he's one of those players that he wants the game, where he wants to be in the lineup. Matthew, I'll turn to my pushback for Celebrini, and this is the question I'll have, which is the Sharks. I think he would have had almost been a lock if the Sharks were in the playoffs. They've tailed off lately, and that's the big pushback for Celebrini. There's two actually, but that's the big one, which is the Sharks aren't that good, and if he could have gotten them just into the playoffs, then you had really built the case for him. But now the Sharks have tailed off and they're not in it. That is there still that strong case for him? The other layer to this whole thing is that I when you look at some voters, they'll say this is his first time there. You kind it a little bit is a lifetime achievement award. Very rarely to someone in their second season. I mean, you have the Crosbys, the McDavids in their second season they win the award, or their third season they win the award. But do you feel like this is going to be one of those where voters are going to say, "We'll put him as a finalist. We're not going to put him as the winner yet." So I think those two things I think are held against him. Your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely say that. I mean, the Sharks could still make the playoffs. They're only 4 points out. So I mean, I mean, the time's running out on him. But I'm just saying, with Celebrini, he's such a huge part of that team and such a that valuable part of his game is still there. I mean, the Sharks wouldn't be near the playoffs or anywhere near it without his contributions. And you're looking at the rest of the team with their, I mean, his plus minus. What I was looking at his plus one. I mean, yes, plus minus is not the biggest stat. He's a plus one on a team that has guys that are in the double digits in minuses. And I mean, and goaltending, he hasn't had the. I mean, Askov's been okay. He hasn't had the best around him. It's still a developing team. And I do agree, I guess, with that part that if they don't make the playoffs, he probably doesn't have the Hart Trophy. But I still think he should be definitely in the conversation for it, even if they don't make the playoffs, just of how much he's been part of the Sharks' success and turning their basically their team around within the last couple seasons. And he hasn't been in the league very long. I think he will win a Hart Trophy at some point. If it's not this season, it'll be some point in the future because I think he's just going to just keep being that valuable part of the Sharks.
I think it's interesting you mentioned that because there's some players that have that narrative where it's, oh, they're young, they'll eventually win the award. And it's like, oh, they'll win it next year. There's always next year. And then all of a sudden you look at them, and that's kind of what happened with Kucherov, ironically, which is that all of a sudden you look back and it's like, wow, he's only won one award. And now he's in his 30s, but it's like, should have more considering how good he's been for so long. MacKinnon actually took a while for him to win the award. And then finally, he gets one after years of being one of the top five or top three players in the game. Matthew, if I were to ask you, what's your big pushback against MacKinnon?
I mean, he is really good, and I think the big pushback is the talent that he has around him. Um, when I look at a lot of teams that have these great players, you take away a lot of the great players that are around him. Do they have the same amount of points? Do his passes get finished? Natchez has so many goals because on passes from MacKinnon. I it's would he have the same amount of assists without the other great players going to finish those passes? I If it was just him, like Celebrini, he's got 98 points with I mean, I'm not saying that he doesn't have talent around him. He's got a lot of great young talent, but not established in the NHL as much. But you're looking at the Avalanche. Natchez is an established goal scorer in the NHL now. If MacKinnon passes him the puck, he'll probably finish it. I I mean, you're looking at a lot of the talent. And Makar, I mean, if he's got him in point, he's going to get a point. If he, you know, I think the biggest thing for pushback on MacKinnon is because he's got so much elite skill around him that his point totals are inflated because he's got that skill to finish what he can do.
I think that's an interesting point that he has all these players around him. I think the pushback against that, or why his case is better this time around, is that he doesn't have Mikko Rantanen. He doesn't have that elite talent around him. But I think an interesting point in comparison to Celebrini, which is Celebrini really does not have the help. I mean, to be fair, Will Smith's a good player, and someday Michael Misa will be a good player. He hasn't played much this year, but someday he will have all those pieces around him, and Sharks presumably will get a good draft pick, or they'll add another player. So they'll have all those pieces around Celebrini, where he will have that supporting cast. He doesn't have it now, but it's actually a good point where MacKinnon does have still. Natchez is really good. Lekkonen's a good player. We got Brock Nelson on the second line. You have all these players. Kadri's now there, so you have actually a lot of talent there, and of course, Cale Makar at the defense position. I actually will throw an interesting question at you, Harrison, which is, and this is actually interesting now. I just thought about it, which is a good way probably to measure the Hart Trophy, which is if you swapped Kucherov and Celebrini, or if you swapped MacKinnon and Celebrini, who looks better in what situation?
Now, it's definitely a
Uh,
very fascinating question there.
It's a
Now,
hypothetical, and it's like
yeah,
because at the same time, it's like, would Kucherov probably have fewer points in San Jose? Yes, I'm sure. And would Celebrini look better in Tampa Bay? Probably. I think just What would probably help at least with Kucherov in a place like San Jose is just the veteran experience that he has compared to Celebrini, where it's like, okay, this is what I got. This is what I can do to maximize it. Like, look, you can just go with the Lightning had a couple of years ago, and I know that's a team that still had Stamkos and Bray and Point, but that was the year where the entire bottom six essentially didn't exist, and he was playing on two lines, and he had half of the scoring was what he was responsible for. So while it's a night and day situation, still you at least have an idea of an idea of what he could do when the depth may not necessarily be there and the supporting cast isn't what it used to be.
It's interesting because I'm thinking of this hypothetical in my head. I'm like wondering, okay, which player in which situation is all of a sudden the best? It's really the way you can vote on this award is take all these players off of their teams. Who is still the most valuable? I think I that now that I think about that, I'm like, if you were to build a team and you had to take all three of these players, which one would you take? Obviously, for the future, you would take Celebrini, but now that I think about it, for a Hart Trophy, I would want MacKinnon just because of you take him, you put him in the middle of your line, you get him top line center. You don't have to worry about that. And he still makes everyone around him better, but also drives play and does all those things. And I know Kucherov does that as well, but I think one of the interesting things is that when you're looking at all these players is which ones have succeeded regardless of the situation, regardless of the changes, what the roster has changed and whatnot. I think what's interesting is that Kucherov and MacKinnon have been around the league for a while where their rosters have changed over the years. The Lightning are a different team now than they have been when they won the Cups back in the day and when they were a top heavy group. Now they have more depth, so it's a little bit of a different team, but and they don't have Steven Stamkos anymore. So it's a different team now, but the Avalanche have gone through changes as well, and those players have stood the test of time or the test of change. Celebrating is going to be an interesting case because like the team's going to actually get better, and people are all of a sudden going to use that supporting cast against him, even though he should deserve the award at some point in his career. Um, let's wrap up some closing statements, closing arguments, because I feel like we've gotten the points out there. So I'll turn it over to you, Matthew, first, which is your closing argument based on all the stuff that's thrown out there for why Celebrini should still win the Hart Trophy.
The biggest thing for Celebrini is the fact that he is the best player every night for the San Jose Sharks. I mean, he's been getting better and better as he's been in the league. And then you put him into an Olympic situation where he isn't the best player on the team and he's still thriving. I think that, I mean, yes, the Olympics aren't the NHL. I'll give it that. But when you're looking at how good of a player he is and you get put into a team that he's basically around his peers of great elite players and he's still standing out as a difference maker. I think that puts a lot on him. And he comes back to the Sharks and continues to be the best player on the team. And he is another guy that can make the guys around him better. Will Smith is still a developing player, but he's better when he's playing with Celebrini, and he's looked a lot more like the guy that they drafted. You're looking at guys that Michael Misa has been there. He's looked good this season as well. I think he's just such a big, he's the nucleus of the Sharks, and he's the best player, I think. And having a 98-point season in what is his third season in the league, or is his second season? I think how many.
Well,
I believe it's
Celebrini's
actually
only
his
been in the
second.
league for
It's
two.
only it's okay. It's even better. His second season in the league, and he's gonna hit 100 points. I this guy's just he's one of the best players already in the NHL at such an early age, and he's just getting better and better. He's the most valuable player in the league right now. I'm when you mentioned about MacKinnon and Kucherov being in the league for so long, I mean, Kucherov took a little bit to get going in his career. Yes, he wasn't a first overall pick. He wasn't. He was a second round, which is still baffling to me. And of course MacKinnon was a first overall pick as well. I mean, and he wasn't a dominant player that early in his career either. It took him a little bit to get going. So I mean, Celebrini at this point is already one of the best players in the league. He deserves the Hart so early in his career.
I like how you mentioned the Olympics a few times, and every time you mention the Olympics, all I can think about is, wow, this does not help my case for MacKinnon, because all I can think about is when MacKinnon in the Olympics is him missing an open net, and that's just the one thing that stands out in my mind. Uh, although in fairness, my defense for MacKinnon is that he actually was good in the Olympics, one of the best players. It was funny because it was him and David Celebrini was like the focal point of Canada's team, so that actually does help his case. And I think going back, I know it's last year, but Four Nations, he actually won the MVP of the 4 game tournament. Not relevant to this season, but it's interesting because so yeah, I mean, Celebrini with that. The question was before the season was, is he going to make the Olympic team? And then all of a sudden, it's like, okay, he's on the Olympic team, but where is he going to play? Is he going to be on the fourth line or third line? And it's like, no, he's on the top line with Connor McDavid, Nathan MacKinnon, or whoever, and then he's playing all the minutes for Canada and playing the big significant role. That was his burst onto the scene. So I think for me, I'm going to try to make a closing argument for MacKinnon, and I think my closing argument is actually interesting because when I brought up hypothetical, I feel like that actually helped. Which is, if you were to ask any hockey fan who you have to pick one player to build around, and I think the answer for years has been McDavid, and he is also putting up another great season. So he's entered that lifetime achievement award where it's okay unless he does something incredible, unless he puts up Gretzky-esque numbers, then he can then you have to give the award to someone else where he has to score 150 points. Something crazy to put himself in that to win the award. With MacKinnon, I think interestingly, he I think leads the league in goals, although it might be the Canadians are playing again. Cole Caulfield might have scored again, so I don't know. MacKinnon's up there with the league lead in goals, so I think that's another argument where if you're looking at the stat from MacKinnon where he is the leading goal scorer of the NHL and he could lead the league in goals by the end of the season. But the question is, if you're to pick one player to build around, I think a lot of people say MacKinnon's the guy to do it. And he's the player that you would draft in a nucleus draft, which is one of the things we do in the summer, but I digress. So that's my argument for him. Harrison, back to you. We're circling back to the favorite here, Kucherov. What's your closing argument for him?
So if we're going to take all that we've discussed today and put it into one final closing argument, it's that Kucherov is the fine balance between the best player on his team, someone who elevates everyone on his team, while also satisfying those who like to look at the stat sheet to make their decisions. He has a chance to win the Art Ross again. He is going to be pushing for well over 40 goals once it is done. He the margin between where he is with points on the season, it's much wider than where MacKinnon is compared to Nietzsche's. And I will give it to Celebrini when it comes to overall. When it comes to the most valuable on his team, it goes to him. The point is that Kucherov is the fine balance. And you can just look at other members of the Lightning who, while are very good, clearly have shown that they can be reliant on him at times. Like, let's look to a star of the team who's since moved on somewhere else. Let's look at Nashville with Steven Stamkos. It took him a good season and a half to find his footing when he wasn't just able to hover around his office and wait for Kucherov to find him for the one-timer. And that just shows the value of a guy like Kucherov. And just to go back to the points for a moment, MacKinnon is currently third in points. If he somehow manages to go and win the Art Ross, I'll concede. If he at least goes to win the Richard, then I think he at least has a case there as well. But let's say Caulfield storms ahead and he takes it. He will have not won the Richard. He would not have won the Art Ross. And then you have a situation where he is on a very good team. I think that would have taken away his Hart Trophy favorite his odds there pretty quickly. Whereas with Kucherov, you have all those. And for that, he's the favorite for a reason. Number two is on the way.
And yeah, I think you've made that point. You've made the basically closing argument. I wonder him versus Celebrini though. What's your case there?
Probably at that point, the difference maker comes down to, again, the balance and the fact that he will have some more hardware going for him. Yes, I'm going to say Celebrini is someone who certainly elevates his team, but so does Kucherov. And he has the numbers to go with it, and I think that's what's going to set him apart.
All right. Um, I think we've made all our good arguments. I know Kucherov's right now the favorite, but but it's one of those races that's actually interesting because I think there's not only do you have a big three, but I think this year also have a field where it's if you're looking at some players that it's even goalies people look at say maybe they should be in the Hart discussion, or maybe a defenseman. Last time a defenseman won the award was Chris Pronger in I think 99 2000. So it's been a while since a defenseman's won the award, but you have a few defensemen that are in the conversation. But it's going as much as Kucherov's a favorite, I don't think he's a heavy favorite. Where it seems where you have time, I think, for all these players to still make a case. And the Sharks make the playoffs. It's going to be hard to vote against Celebrini, just be considering where the Sharks are as a team, where they are rebuilding, and with MacKinnon, if the Avalanche end up with the best record in the NHL. And the Lightning right now are actually in a fight for the best record in their division. So it's actually interesting with the Sabres pulling ahead, which we didn't expect, but here we are. So it's going to be an interesting race. It's really exciting, and it's going to be fun to watch as it unfolds. I always love doing this. So really appreciate you guys taking the time out of your busy schedule. That is all we got. Make sure to check out Matthew's work and Harrison's work at the Hockey Writers. Check it all for the Canucks coverage, Lightning, and NHL at large. We hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, share, subscribe to my YouTube channel, Mike Fink Hockey Writer, because that would help pay the bills. But I digress. We hope you enjoyed, and tune in next time for another great episode. Thank you.